Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for coming to this webinar. I hope everyone's got a fan pointed at them and a drink for the duration. So welcome to today's webinar entitled Creating a Whole School Culture of Belonging and Inclusion in partnership with Flourish and ARC. I'm Alan. I'm Senior Account Manager here at Flourish. And through my conversations with schools, I know that creating a genuine sense of belonging and inclusion is a priority for many leaders. But we also know that this doesn't happen by chance. It takes intentional, whole school approaches that help every child feel seen, valued, and supported to thrive. So that's exactly what today's session is all about. Just before we get started, Vivian has mentioned this already, I think, but just a bit of housekeeping. Please keep your microphones on mute unless you're invited to speak. If you have any questions or comments throughout the webinar, please pop them into the chat and we'll make sure they're put to our speakers during the session. For those of you that are new to Flourish, I just wanted to give you a quick introduction to how we, as an organisation, support schools. At Flourish, we support schools, multi-academy trusts and local authorities to strengthen behaviour, attendance and inclusion through trauma-informed relational practice. Over the past 18 years, we've supported more than 4,000 schools and over 100 local authorities to embed consistent whole school approaches that improve outcomes for children and young people. And we do this through expert-led training and through our award-winning online learning that's all designed to turn evidence into practical strategies that can be implemented with confidence. We're incredibly proud of the long-lasting impacts our programmes are having in schools across the country. We've recently published a national impact report which clearly highlights the difference that a whole school approach can make on exclusions, attendance, attainment and culture. If you're interested in learning any more about what Flourish do or how we might be able to support you, you can find us on the ARC Training Providers Directory. But to the important part of the webinar, our speakers today, I'm delighted to introduce you to our two speakers that we have with us here today. And first we have Tom Clarkson. Tom is the Assistant Principal for Pastoral Care and the designated Safeguarding Lead at Beacon Hill Academy in Dudley. Beacon Hill approached us a couple of years ago now when they wanted to improve behaviour and become trauma aware. They've since completed our whole school attachment and trauma training. And today Tom will share how that journey has shaped their culture, strengthened belonging and transformed the way staff understand and respond to behaviour. We're also delighted to have with us here today Emma Thomas, who is the virtual school head at Dudley Virtual School. Emma is going to share why belonging matters for vulnerable children, common barriers schools are facing and the value of collaboration. But first we'll hear from Tom, so over to you, Tom.
Thank you, Alan. Just get my slides up on the screen. Okay, Alan, if you give me a thumbs up, can you see that on your screen now? Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining. As Alan said, hope you're keeping cool as much as you possibly can. So I'm going to talk about the journey that we've been on over the last 2 or 3 years and the impact that working with Flourish has had on the school and our community as a whole. So I'm hoping that by the end of these slides, there's maybe hopefully at least one thing that you take away and think, you know what, that could help us. Because I know we're all on a journey and I'll talk about our journey in a moment. So first of all, when I suppose any leader for pastoral, there's a number of things that you probably want to prioritise. These were 4 things for us. So I know we shouldn't always have to think about this, but we do. So thinking of our 3-year trend that Ofsted will come in and look at. So is your 3-year trend positive for suspensions, for your internal isolations? So if you see a word, the initials SE, that is our equivalent of what schools would generally say isolation. It's supporting expectations in our school. So making sure that trajectory is moving in the right direction. We want to make sure there's no vulnerable groups that are being suspended disproportionately. Reduce the numbers that go into our SE, but actually more importantly, that if you walk around our school, you'll get a feel for a positive learning climate that's built on a culture of mutual respect. And actually, I'd say that's the biggest thing we're proud of. Hearing our students say, actually heard one the other day for the first time, go how cool Beacon Hill is. Hadn't heard that one for a bit. So actually the culture when you're moving around the school is probably the most important part of that. So onto the impact. Now this, I've hidden all the other Dudley schools here, but in terms of our Key Stage 4 outcomes, last year we were 3rd out of the 18 Dudley schools. Our principal won't mind me sharing that a few years ago we were the 18th or 17th or 18th school in that list. So we're proud of the journey in terms of the outcomes that our learners leave, going on to whatever their destinations are after that. And we won't settle for 3rd either. We're hoping that our more recent results that will take us even further. But we're proud of that journey. Also, our suspensions. I know that looks like a very linear decline, but that is actually the graph that was created. So that's our suspensions year on year that continue to reduce. Our SE, so our internal isolation, continue to fall, and our attendance is up year on year. Still not where we want it to be, and all of these factors we can still go further, but that's been the impact over the last 2 or 3 years working with Flourish. And in terms of our journey, everything in our CPD is underpinned by these 3 areas. So everything we do is either in reference to relationships, routines, or responses. What I should have said at the start is if there's any, I don't mind either way, if there's any questions while I'm talking, I'll try my best to monitor the chat at the same time, but I know Vivian will also keep an eye on that, so feel free to throw any questions at me during, or happy to take questions at the end. Yeah, so relationships, routines, responses is everything. Our CPD is linked to those 3 areas, and I imagine in your climate, in your environment, that you might be able to look at one of those and go, you know what, we're really strong at that, but actually it's this area that we need to work on. So our first step, what we decided we need to work on, was the relationships, which I'll talk about how we did that in a moment. So the relationships, we talk about the adult behaviour there. So we had certain routines in place, certain responses that I'll come to, but actually the relationships was missing at the start. So we started there. You might be at a school where you go, you know what, you've nailed the relationships, it's the routines. A bit that we're still continuing to make better. I think we can all make all areas better, but at the moment we're looking at the responses and the repair bit. So when something goes wrong, and it inevitably will, what is the repairing? What does that look like in your school? And I'll come to that in a bit as well. Now, when we look at adult behaviour, if you're ever looking at some CPD, there's something, this very much links in with the Flourish work. We did what's called a brain architecture game. So before we started looking at changing the adults' behaviour in the school, we wanted to really give them the reason why. So to understand what trauma-informed practice is, what trauma does to a teenage brain, because we thought if we get our staff to understand that first, we get more of a buy-in. So if you do ever want quite an interactive, practical CPD activity, the brain architecture game is a great one. If you Google it, it really gets you to understand why you could have 30 different children responding differently in your classroom because all their brains might be wired up slightly differently, and what the impact of early childhood can have on that wiring of the brain. So yeah, really good tool. We started off with that, and it was almost like a eureka moment for the staff to go, that's why that young person reacts in that way, and why one person can respond well one day and another person can't. So yeah, worth having a look at if you're looking at some whole staff CPD. Right, so firstly, looking at the adult behaviour, and yes, steak is my favourite food, but there's more of a reason for why that is on the screen. So if you were going to judge a meal, so you're determining whether a meal that you've had is a decent one, and you'd recommend it, and you're thinking which part of the bite of that meal is the most important. Research and AI, when I also was looking at this, would tell you that the first bite is the most important one. So your first bite of your meal sets the tone for the rest of the meal. Yes, there's an argument that the last bite as well would also give you kind of your lasting impact from it as well. And if I can link that into the classroom now, so I don't continue to talk about food, what does your first bite look like? What is the first experience? What is the first meet and greet at your school? So I know you will have, we've done, I imagine, done a lot of work on meet and greets, but not just at the classroom. What's the meet and greet look like at your gate? Which probably is very different from a primary school to a secondary school. So we have quite an interesting meet and greet, which might not sound very relationship driven to start with. So we have in our school in North Dudley, we have security scanners. So our trust, Dudley Academies Trust, we have security scanners for all of our 4 secondary schools. So that might sound like quite a cold start to the day, but actually what the security scanners do, apart from the obvious reason of having them, it gives us an opportunity to check in with 1,200 of our students immediately. So we get 1,200 students get eye contact with an adult straight away who's naming them. We're pretty good at that from the start of learning everyone in your whole school, or everyone in our whole school, their name. So there's a routine there straight away that they have to follow. So we've got an embedded routine, but we've also got adults meeting and greeting straight away. So there's our first safeguarding radar as well, immediately as the child comes in. So you'd be welcome if there's anyone local and you're thinking, how do security scanners blend in with a relational approach? More than happy for you to come and see how it's done in the morning, with smiles on our face and often music, and that's our principal who would put the music on. So quite a warm start to the day. And then you've got your meet and greet that you'd have from your form tutor to the classrooms, because that is where you are setting the weather for the day. We have an approach, and Paul Dick's couple of bits you'll notice if you're a Paul Dick's fan, there's a couple of bits stolen from there. Very much big on heart, strong on boundaries. We refer to the relationship piggy bank. So when you are doing a meet and greet, it's that you are filling that currency up with a relationship piggy bank. And occasionally we need to take out some currency when we're having to deal with any unwanted behaviours. But if you filled it to start with, you're much more likely to get the outcomes you want when you're challenging anything that you don't want to see. Now, we have, for our meet and greet, we're stood on the 50-50 threshold, monitoring the corridor, monitoring your classroom, and we have 2 expectations from the member staff. That is relationship piggy bank checking in, and also a rule reminder. Because if there's anyone questioning whether going down a relationship approach is a soft approach, very much not. So there's a couple of points I'll make with that in a moment. So depending where you get your research, like people saying actually relationship driven practice is fluffy, is soft. If you embed it with high expectations, strong routines, then it's 100% not that way, and actually it's a really strong approach. So we have a rule reminder and a relationship piggy bank expectation from all of our staff. So that might be something as straightforward as, morning John, saw you in the football match, that's fantastic, just reminding you your DNA is on the board, expect you to go and do that silently, thank you, great to see you. So it's just that blend. So rule reminder, relationship piggy bank. And we refer to poker chips, and poker chips being self-esteem. So when good things happen to you, you get poker chips, you build your self-esteem. When bad things happen to you, poker chips are taken away, or you're not given any. And the idea with this is that you've got 30 kids in every class competing at the game of school with a very differing amount of poker chips. Young person that's woken up to breakfast being made for them, all their clothes ironed on their bottom of the bed. I love you, sir. Have a great day. Meet their friends who all greet them. Teacher knows their name. bags and bags of poker chips being given to them, compared to another child who maybe has to get up, make siblings breakfast and walk them to school, late to school, gets told off. You can see where I'm going there. Who won't have the same amount of poker chips, and you can see why those two different children will react in different scenarios. So just on these cracks here, linking to the point I made a minute ago, if you're going down a route of pure just relationships, without the routines, without the high expectations, I think cracks will appear. You need to have those high expectations and routines in place along with the relationship approach. So just want to reiterate that I'm not here saying that a whole behaviour policy can be purely on relationships. I just think it should be at the forefront of it. You need systems in place, you need consequences. Children need to know that there's accountability and responsibility, but relationships at the forefront. Now, if we were in a face-to-face, I'll be asking you all, what can you see here? And those who've seen it before might give a different answer, but a number of you would probably be saying, I see a square with a black dot. And those who've seen it before will go, actually, there's a load of white space around it. So again, we have a huge focus on what we call as positive noticing. So if you've got 30 kids and 29 are doing the right thing, and one person has walked into the classroom not meeting your expectation, your first attention needs to go to the 29. So we've done a huge amount of work on that, because more than likely the one that's not on board will suddenly become the white space with everyone else and get on board that way. So recognise first attention to the best behaviour is our mantra on that, and it's very tempting not to at times, but when it becomes the norm, it just makes the start of that first bite a really powerful first bite. So first attention to best behaviour, we think is really key for the success in our school. And the final bit on the adult behaviour is that we are modelling the behaviours. So it was a previous school that I'll reference here, and we've probably all had these moments when we had a child that had to be suspended for a certain amount of abusive language that came out their mouth. And when Nan appeared and challenged him with her delightful words, it was very clear why we were going to have that battle. So as not all of our young people are going to have these behaviours modelled at home and out and about in the community. So we need to start with that. So our adult behaviour needs to be what we would refer to as calm, rational and unshockable at all times. Now, we are human beings, and there are times we might not be calm and might not be rational. But if I come back to our relationship piggy bank, those rare moments where you might have to raise your voice in the classroom, or you might have been let down by a child, if you filled that relationship piggy bank beforehand, you're more likely to get the desired response that you want. But if you are not calm, unrational, and showing that you're shocked with lots of different behaviours, and that is a repeated behaviour by yourself, then you are not modelling what you want the learners to see. We want our learners, that's the way we talk for students. So we want our learners to be calm as much as possible, be rational with their decisions. So we need to model that at all times. And you've probably heard different phrases here in terms of like connection before correction or connection before content. Every interaction is an intervention, and it's not going to happen overnight. It's these interactions every single day in the corridor, on the playground, in the classroom, phone calls home. So every interaction is an intervention. And I'd say when you're looking at interventions, and yes, there are some successful SEMH interventions and cognitive interventions. Actually, I'd say one of the biggest impacts, and linking this to Flourish here, is actually just your interactions with learners every single day. That is a better intervention than something that you might spend thousands of pounds on. And that unconditional positive regard at all times, because the young people will know as soon as they see your face, they know which member of staff is really looking forward to seeing them and which one might not be. So even if we might not be, we need to convince them that we are. And in terms of rewards programs in school, I'm all for it. I'm not saying you shouldn't have rewards programs. Obviously, we would love young people to do the right thing because it's the right thing, and that intrinsic motivation and that feeling you get. Some students need that extrinsic reward first before we get to that point. But actually, for a number of our young people, the connection with the adult is the reward. That's better than what a chocolate bar can be and free ice cream. I'm saying chocolate bar and free ice cream because we give a lot of those out, but that connection is more important. Onto the routines, because like I said at the start, relationships on their own, your cracks will appear. We need these embedded routines, high expectations. And when we talk about explicitly taught routines, and I'll come to the behaviour curriculum in a minute. So someone can't do algebra, we teach them algebra. If they can't read, we put them on a phonics program. If you can't walk into a classroom silently and sit down and complete a DNA, we don't just tell them, we teach them. So we will repeat that process of, okay, this is how we learn, how we walk in. We don't scream and shout. It's not just telling, it's teaching. So with behaviour, we need to teach that behaviour. And if Ofsted makes reference to this behaviour curriculum, it's in the suspension guidance, DfE guidance. So what is your behaviour curriculum? Is it just an assembly once a week in the PSHE curriculum, or is your behaviour curriculum every single day, every single lesson? And that's, you can't be relying on just that assembly that you do once a week and that 1 hour of PSHE that in some secondary schools might be inform time and so on. So it's every adult singing off the same hymn sheet, every single lesson, explicitly teaching routines, not telling, teaching. And then when it comes to routines, it's also what are the routines for your staff as well. So if I was to give you a scenario of me welcoming a class into my room, so I've got my 50-50 threshold, I'm meeting and greeting, I'm making sure there's a relationship piggy bank connection and a rule reminder, and now my class have all come in silently and I've done my register and they're now working. I will now be stood in my pastor's perch, so the position in the room, many of you would have come across this before, position in the room where I can see everyone without me having to turn my body, so normally the corner of a room. So I will stand there in that position, and if I need to move, I'll be an observant crab. Be careful if you're delivering this CPD to staff. Nearly fell over the first time I was delivering my example of my observant crab, but how you're moving around the room, still being able to see the class. And looking around the pillar, this isn't my CPD. The name of the guy has gone for me. He's quite well known on social media with going over these strategies. But looking around the pillar, if you're making it really exaggerated that you're looking at different people and you're pretending you're looking around the imaginary pillar, just again, routines. And some of these, they might seem quite basic. A pastor's perch and looking around the pillar can be an absolute game changer in the classroom just because of those routines we embed. So we need explicitly taught routines for our young people, but what are your routines that your staff are asked to do? Because in terms of a teenage brain or a young person's brain, if they're getting the same deal, there's the same response from an adult. So if we use 3-2-1 star to get the class's attention. If every adult's doing it, that's training the brain to respond in a certain way. If I've got one teacher saying everyone be quiet, another teacher saying thank you all, another class saying shut up, hopefully not, then that's 3 different ways of asking a class to be quiet. So embedded routines for staff as well will make it easier for your young people. And then I'll come on to the responses. So you may have these staff that you might be thinking of here. So when responding to unwanted behaviour, is there ever a power struggle? We never want to be in a power struggle. You might have an adult that you're thinking of who likes to win that battle, but they haven't. There is no winner once it gets into a power struggle. So you need some kind of mutual understanding when we're challenging unwanted behaviours, and you need to be aiming to make sure everyone's dignity is left intact. Obviously yours, but also the young person's. If you've got a child leaving where they think that they've been hard done by, or you've embarrassed them, or you've belittled them, that relationship has been broken. It's going to need to be put back together again. And sometimes it's okay to break a relationship and put it back together, but not through any kind of embarrassment or where someone's dignity is not left intact. So challenging unwanted behaviours with dignity left intact. So you might have a script of what that looks like, where you make reference to previous positive behaviour. So there's a number of different ways for us to make sure that we have no power struggle. When we make an expectation really clear, we will then disengage and expect compliance. So we might inquire if it's something as simple as child hasn't completed the amount of work in the DNA and they've had 5 minutes to do so and it's incomplete. Might check in first and go, is there any help needed here? And if there's no help needed, it's not that they're struggling, then I'll make my expectation clear. I need you to complete that question 2 in the next 3 minutes. Thank you. I will then disengage from that situation. I'll expect compliance. If I stay there going, you need to start question 2 now, a power struggle begins. I don't want to be made to look stupid in front of the class. He or she doesn't want to be made to look stupid in front of their peers. And we get a power struggle and we're both going to lose in this situation. So make your expectation clear, disengage, expect compliance. It might take 10 seconds before they pick up the pen while they're kind of demonstrating the secondary behaviours. But more than likely, if you've made it clear and you disengage, you're more likely to get the response that you want. And then for us, like I said at the start, the bit we've got further work to do on is how we restore and repair the relationship. So what does that look like in your school? So we have an expectation that any child that's removed from a classroom at any point has to have a restorative conversation either that night or the following evening, which we can do as a secondary school easily. I'm sure there's other opportunities in primary schools that can be done, but there has to be that repair before they get back together in the classroom again. Often that's the immediate time of something going wrong isn't the right time because emotions might be high. So, but there is an expectation that the relationship is restored. Conversation with home is really important here as well. So you'll have different processes in place there, but that's a really important part of the restorative practice and links in very much with the Flourish work in terms of relationships. Now, from a strategic point of view, depending on what position you're in, it's looking at what barriers do your children and families face. So what environmental factors, what I think of the 4 areas of need from an SEN point of view. What are the barriers, but how do you find out this information and where does it start? So does this start in transition? Probably for most schools. We've actually just had our 2nd transition day today. This might not sound like a very fun part of transition, but 240 year 6 students have come up, and over the last 2 days they've been screened for speech and language and phonics. There's been some nice stuff, inflatables and ice creams as well, just to balance that out. But we've had 240 screened for phonics and speech and language. That means that the next time we see them, we will already have a timetable in place. So we had 40 out of the 240 that have been flagged up at speech and language. Don't know the phonics right now, but I'll get that data later. So we know there's 40 learners that we need to timetable for speech and language intervention straight away. So it's what gives you your data? Where do you get that information from? And when you get that information, it's making sure we act on it. So there'd be no good us screening for speech and language if we didn't have a provision available to sort it out. So it's really important, the data you find out, what is your response to that? So whether that's, like I said, phonics before, whether that's a social, emotional, mental health, what's the package, what's the menu of support for that? So we have something at our school called the Key to Inclusion, where any child that coming across a barrier, so if any child is removed from a classroom, we will look to the Key to Inclusion and go, okay, what's the barrier there? Is it an environmental factor? If it is it external services? Is it mentoring we need? Is it a cognition and learning? So we'll screen for phonics. Is it dyslexia screening? So we have a Key to Inclusion to making sure that any barriers to the classroom are broken down. I think that's a big part to why our suspensions, isolations have drastically came down over the last few years. And if you read the new suspension and exclusion guidance, very much heavily weighted towards PP and SEN and what we're doing to support. So if you're not suspending, you're on 0 suspensions, fantastic. If that's managed by you, we're not a 0 suspension school. I'm not sure we ever will be, but they've drastically come down, but when it comes to PP and SEN, there's a number of extra questions that we will ask of ourselves to make sure that, one, we're not suspending disproportionately, we're not prejudicing against any SEN need or due to the pupil premium status, because that's just, if you're disproportionately suspending PP SEN, I think that's a statistic, or that's data that no school wants and no school can be proud of. So something that that's something that we heavily look at for SEN and PP in particular. Still not perfect. We're better than national averages with SEN and PP, but not where we'd want it to be still. So I'll come back to it, always being a journey. But it's something that if you probably all are already making sure those questions are being asked. And the bit that I put everything else is, I've gone on about relationships, routines being key, how we respond to unwanted behaviour, but actually in terms of a school culture, and the reason why that child the other day, I think, said to me, Beacon Hill, he's so cool. Yes, I think the relationship comes into it, but I think it's everything else you do. So it's the celebration assemblies, it be your sports days. We had a handful of kids at a Gladiators event last week. Of course, a TikTok dance. Why wouldn't you do a TikTok dance with all your house? We do it as a house competition. We did that as part of our wellbeing week a few weeks ago. And it's everything else you do. And I think that's where you get the smiles, you build the relationships further, and why certain kids might say Beacon Hill's cool, because of everything else we do, not just what's going on in the classroom. And I think you need a blend of that, those relationships, those routines, but a bit of fun as well, and putting a smile on the face. So if hopefully there's something you can take away from what I've said. If it was me summarising it, I'd be looking at, if I'm going back to the start of my journey here at Beacon, I was looking at, right, is it relationships, routines, or responses where we needed to start, and relationships for me. Then it was looking at that one aspect and that one aspect only, and getting that right. And then what does your data tell you, and how do you act on that data? So happy to answer any questions if there's any questions now, but I appreciate that's a lot of me talking in a few minutes. So if there is anything, you can. I'm not very. I'm not big on social media. I'm on LinkedIn, and that's about it. But if you contacted Beacon Hill Academy, if there's any questions, if you wanted the PowerPoint at any point, I'm not precious. You can have anything, and you'd be welcome to come over to Beacon Hill at any point if there's anything you want to have a look at.
And the webinar is being recorded, so it will be uploaded onto the ARC website. It won't be tomorrow, probably be next week, but it will be there if people want to refer back. Okay, any questions for Tom? No, it's all going very quiet. If there are any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat and I will monitor them. Thank you, Tom. That was really interesting, and it sounds like a great place to be. Well done. Okay, Emma, are we coming over to you now?
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you.
Okay.
So hopefully, can you see then?
Yes.
Slides I've got. Lovely. Thank you very much. Well, afternoon, everybody. My name's Emma Thomas. I'm the head of Dudley Virtual School, and I'm really pleased to be able to be here this afternoon, but to also be here with Tom, who has mentioned so many things that makes me smile as a virtual school head, that I can hear schools embedding in their practice. And I know, and Tom, you'd probably agree, you've been on a journey with this, and I think any school that we talk to about becoming trauma informed and a relational approach, it is a journey. So it is lovely to hear you speak about it, Tom. What I'm going to do, and many of the things that Tom has touched on, I will also be touching on as far as the lens of a virtual school head, supporting children who are in care, but also with our lens of supporting any child with a social worker, or those in kinship arrangements. So we are talking about those learners across your schools that are vulnerable, need that lens of looking and supporting, and many of the things that Tom has said this afternoon. So, oh, hang on, let me just go on to my next There we go. So I'm going to start with belonging. And when we talk about belonging, we talk about it being far more than just attendance and behaviour. For our vulnerable children in schools, the belonging is that fundamental building block that you build everything else on. We all know that children in care and care experienced young people have experienced trauma, adversity, maybe loss. So there's lots and lots of ACEs that those children may have experienced before they came into care, as they're coming into the care system as well. It may make them feel unsafe. And that connection sometimes is lost. Obviously, they are no longer living with their birth families. They are sometimes moved, sometimes a long way away from the areas that they know. So it is really difficult for them to begin to engage and learn and thrive again. But that belonging is always at the heart of it. We talked to many care experienced young people, and one lady was talking last week at an event I was at, and she was talking about her story of when she was in care when she was younger, and it really struck me that the moment that she talked about was that sense of belonging. And actually that sense of belonging came from her care placement, but it was the point that she really felt like someone could see her and she felt like she belonged. And that can happen for a child, not just in a care placement, but in school as well. Tom already mentioned it, but every interaction is an intervention, and those little tiny moments of "it's lovely to see you, how are you doing today, how was your weekend," if they're into, I don't know, if they're into their football or they go to a kind of an activity outside of school that you know about, it's bringing that in, and that genuine curiosity about your children and your learners in school is what makes them feel like they are beginning to belong. I know some of the schools that we work with really actively focus on intentional kind of work around relationships. Tom's obviously touched on it this afternoon, but having those relationships, creating that sense of routine where our young people understand what is going to happen to them in schools, builds that sense of emotional safety. I was talking to one school a few weeks ago where they felt like their child was scanning the room, and we all understood that that child wasn't feeling safe. They were obviously safe in school, absolutely, but they didn't have that sense of safety. So there's lots and lots of work that needs to be done to make that child feel that they are safe in their environment. So relational approaches, and again, we've touched on this already this afternoon, but also wanting to kind of touch on that research as well. Research consistently shows that strong and trusting relationships are the foundation of that engagement and positive development for children. And I know Tom's already mentioned Paul Dix. We had Paul Dix come to one of our education conferences a couple of years ago now, and he spoke about deliberate botheredness. I can't ever say it the first time. And it's that making a conscious effort to connect with the children that you're supporting, and how no matter how small the interaction is, that can build over time. Admittedly, over time can build that trust with a child. Tom's obviously talked about positive regard, and again we advocate for that as well for our children. It's that key unconditional positive regard means that separating the child from behaviour that you may see, but always valuing that child as the person, and kind of disconnecting their behaviours, seeing the behaviours and not challenging those behaviours as you should do, but really always seeing that child and being curious. One of the schools I went into, they talked about a behaviour incident that happened, and the head really couldn't quite understand what had happened, and instead of that situation escalating, she brought him into a safe space and he talked about a family member going into hospital, and that was all happening. So for him, everything was happening outside of school, and because that team member had been curious about why that behaviour was happening, and then that de-escalation of conversation that happened avoided that escalation. And as virtual school heads, we're often kind of notified and brought into conversations where a situation has escalated so very quickly, and I understand totally why that can happen in schools, but that curiousness, that kind of de-escalation is really important, and focusing on what could this be. Tom, you touched on kind of obviously high expectations, and I totally agree with that as well. We have to have that environment of a relational approach, but with high standards and high expectations for our children as well. So as a virtual school in Dudley and across the West Midlands, we're a really close network of virtual school heads, and we champion trauma-informed approaches in schools, and we have supported many of our schools with trauma-informed training opportunities through Flourish, to be able to begin their journeys through the ARC membership that they have got. There is the audit tool within that where they can reflect on their strengths, because there are many strengths within school, but then see what developments they will like to kind of pursue with that journey of being trauma informed as approaching school. Science is compelling that childhood trauma can affect the development of the brain, particularly in the areas where you see that emotional regulation and attention and the memory. So all of those things that we're expecting children to do when they're in the classroom could be affected by the trauma they've experienced in their earlier years, or happening right now for some of your children in your classrooms. So when a child then perceives that threat, their brain goes into survival mode, and we can see those behaviours sometimes escalating for them. Sometimes not a conscious decision on their part. Their brain has them flipped, and I say flipped because there is, and again, Tom, you mentioned kind of knowing who it was, but there is a very good example of the brain, and then when it flips, and they're not in control of those responses. We can see that the trauma-informed approaches you've heard Tom talk about is really successfully embedded in Beacon Hill, and it's embedded in the schools across their trust as well. And it's not, trauma-informed approaches isn't just a training session, it is a way of life within that school. It is that ethos that they've got within the school. So it does take time to embed, and it's definitely a shift from thinking, well, what's wrong with that child, to rather than what do you think is happening for that child, and how can we support them, and what do they need. So thank you to Beacon Hill and the Dudley Academies Trust for the work they've done across their trust, and I know that we'll continue to work with Flourish and the Dudley Academy Trust in the future with work that we will work on together. What I'd also like to say is that trauma-informed approaches is a combination of high expectations with high support for children looked after. Whenever we're talking to our young people, they want to be treated the same as their peers, but with the recognition that sometimes they might need extra support. So they want those high expectations as well. They have got high expectations of themselves, and sometimes that just takes a little bit more support to find that out and get them there. So I'm going to touch on barriers, because I know that sometimes schools, I've obviously talked about all of the things that we would love schools to be able to implement and the journey that they would go on, but also recognising that there are barriers and challenges for schools when they're doing this. And I know schools are operating in a rapidly changing environment at the moment, alongside the SEND reforms that are happening, and there's a strong focus on nationally for schools to be more inclusive in the mainstream provisions, improving attendance, reducing suspensions. So we've got those high expectations from the government and the DfE around what schools should be doing. But obviously, I know, and from a virtual school perspective, we can see those increasing levels of need, and growing numbers of children that sometimes find social emotional difficulties, whether it's neurodiversity, whether it's impact of trauma, or sometimes unmet SEND needs, make that challenging to be in a classroom for some of our children. I think sometimes as well, we've seen, and looking at our data, that attendance then can be significantly impacted by that as well. So how can we then support children to attend? We can see particularly that secondary girls are struggling with attendance, and persistent absence can often be linked to those anxieties and that sense of belonging that maybe isn't quite there for them. We can also see that vulnerable groups are overrepresented in behaviour incidences, suspensions, permanent exclusions, and it is great to hear Beacon Hill working through that, in that they're looking at who that might be and what then extra support they can put in. So that is great, and I think for many of our conversations with schools, it's around monitoring that before it gets to the crisis points, before those we're at risk of permanent exclusion. The work is being put in place way back when maybe we can see that attendance dipping a little bit. What are those interventions put in there? Okay, and then I'm touching on already about what effective schools are doing. As a virtual school head, we've got a real privilege of going out to different schools. For me, obviously in Dudley, but our children can be placed anywhere in the country. So having different conversations with different types of schools, with different catchment areas, different children, to be able to see the different strategies and the work that schools are doing. And it is immense, the amount of effort and support that is put in. So I'd like to kind of then say that actually there are many things probably that Tom has said, that I've said this afternoon, that you're thinking, well, we do that. And I think we've got to really celebrate the things that as schools we are impacting and doing already. So we can see that relational approaches can be data driven. I've worked with a number of schools where they look at their data first, and that drives the work that they do. So it's not just, I know we talked about it kind of possibly being approached as kind of wishy-washy. It is not. You can put that through your data, looking at where are those vulnerable learners sitting in your data, whether it's the academic data you're looking when you're baselining your children when they come into your settings. Is it the suspension data, the attendance data? So it can be a real focus. And then as a school, what are you doing to then support those vulnerable learners, those cohorts, those subgroups within your schools, to pull that through? And I think for me, those school leaders are asking the right questions around which children are less engaged, which ones have got emerging attendance concerns. Are there particular groups that are within your behaviour incidents that happen in school, and what's the impact of the interventions that you're putting in place? Tom, you mentioned that kind of those little tiny interventions can be worth just as much as a big cost intervention, because you're building that sense of belonging, that child feeling that they they're part of the school. So the relational approach is then strengthened by that evidence and the work you do in school. And what I also want to say around here is that there is that consistency of approach. So many of our young people have so many different experiences. They may have numbers of care placements, number of different schools, but then if you they're coming into a school where there is that consistent routine, the same approaches, that restorative practice, they then know where they are as well, and then that adds to their feeling of belonging as well. I can't stress, I know I'm looking at the slide at the top, I can't stress enough the conversations we have around positive relationships, trusted adults within school, that those young people have got those relationships with and can get to that person when they're needed as well. We see that is an important factor for our children. So obviously a virtual school is part of the local authority. What we find from a virtual school perspective is for when our vulnerable children are supported with a social worker, a school, virtual school working together, and other professionals that may be involved, whether it's SEND, whether it's an educational psychologist, when those professionals are working really closely together, we can see that partnership working really does hold that child in the middle of it all, and all of those professionals then are supporting. So I can't stress the importance of that collaboration together as importantly as it is, because we know that when we're working together as partners, that actually that does bring everybody's focus onto that child, and then possibly identifying those needs earlier, because we've got those professionals supporting that child as well. What we'd always advocate is, and as a virtual school, if you have got children who are obviously looked after, of course they'll be supported through the PEP process, but virtual schools support children that are previously looked after, children with a social worker, those in kinship arrangements. So there is support and guidance around those children and those children that you may have in your school as well. So please do reach out to virtual schools to gather that kind of knowledge that we may have that be able to support you with those children in schools. And then just to follow up. Oh, it's not coming up. There we go. The heat has stopped. My key messages coming through to you all. Oh no, there they are. They've appeared. So just for me, my key kind of takeaways from this session, and hopefully they've come across for you as well, is that sense of belonging is that first little bit. And if we can be deliberately bothered by our children, as Paul Dix would be saying, if we can say that hello and that kind of interaction, that positive interaction, each time we see our young people that we know need that support, that is a key to building those trusting relationships. Obviously, effective practices in school, that routine, the calmness. Tom, you mentioned that calmness as well. That supports our young people to feel safe in those environments and know what's coming up and know what's happening, and understanding that those members of staff in that school are there to support them and then help them with their learning, because if they're not ready for that, we're not going to get the learning until they're ready and they feel that they are safe in their schools. And when I say safe in the school, I know they're safe, but actually their sense of feeling that they're safe. And then obviously I can't kind of stress enough that collaboration and reaching out to your virtual schools. particularly in the West Midlands. I don't know where obviously you're coming in from, but I know that nationally virtual schools are working really well in collaboration across local authorities, because as we know, our children don't all just stay in our one local authority. So please do obviously reach out to your virtual school, because there is a wealth of support and knowledge there to help that collaboration in your schools as well.